Hello and welcome to HackerNoon's Top Stories Roundup. I'm Nicholas one of HackerNoon's editors, and today I'd like to go over 5 stories that I think was the very best of what HackerNoon received over the last week. Every week we get around 400 articles, usually more, about anything the internet has to offer, such as blockchain and business, to cryptocurrency and gaming, to NFTs and art, and so much more than that. And of these 400 plus stories, HackerNoon selects around 30 to be our top stories for the period of time. These stories get put up here on the list where we want everyone to see them. But sometimes some stories are more timely or more important than others. So this week I'd like to cover 5 stories that I think everyone who visits HackerNoon should read while they are still fresh. The first article we have on the list today is How to Shorten a URL, written by Marinsburg. It's their first story, but honestly, it is such good work. It explains the process behind shortening a URL, something which I just assumed that happened with a snap of fingers, in such a way that I can understand it as someone who doesn't actually write any code. It is illuminating, frankly, about the process behind it, and I think it would be helpful for both people such as myself and people who are trying to get into writing web stuff, simply because it covers it in a very accessible manner. So that this is definitely one of the articles you have to read this week. Our second article this week is what we call a slogging thread with the founder of BrickTrade, GovKang. Slogging is basically where HackerNoon sits a guy down and the whole team has a go at him and figures out and asks questions and figures stuff out. GovKang's business, BrickTrade, is something that's quite interesting. It takes the blockchain to real estate, making it possible to democratize real estate, which sounds a bit absurd, but it does make some sense once he explains it. So if you take a look at the slogging thread and read through it, you'll understand a lot more about it. And don't worry, it's not really filtered. We just sling questions at the guy and he has to answer it. So I hope you find it as interesting as I did. So HackerNoon has some blogging fellows, which I assure you are not treated like slaves, but actually learn things and write some articles for us in exchange. They learn stuff like SEO and how to write articles, and in this case, how to do a listicle. And our author today, Evgeny Kim, has written a great article on 8 games to play when the world is falling apart. It's good to remember that games aren't just as stressful as Elden Ring, where you die constantly, or they're not as technical as DCS or any of those games. They can be a great way to relax and de-stress after a long day of work. And this listicle provides exactly that, in exactly the format that you need to understand it. So the next article is written by Hussein Halak and published on the Next to Centrum Technologies account. It is an article that looks into what happened when Todd Kramer, a famous NFT investor, had much of his library frozen by OpenSeas, which was a big shock to the NFT industry because that's not something that's normally supposed to happen. It's an article that looks into some of the consequences from this action and what it might mean for the NFT industry as a whole going forward. It's an interesting look at the topic and covers a lot that I didn't know happened back then. And I recommend people read it. I think it's a great article. So a final article this week is How Microsoft Tipped My Linux Love Over the Edge. A very funny headline written by the ghost of HackerNoon himself. And I'm really sorry, I've never heard your name spoken aloud. Nebojsa Todorovic. I hope I got that right. Please don't ask David to fire me. Anyway, this story is a great look at why someone might give up using Microsoft Windows instead of an open source solution like Linux, the most popular one. It goes over some of the alternatives that Linux offers and some of the motivations behind his decision to move away from Windows, which is something that I think a lot of us would rather not do, because Windows kind of works most of the time for most of us. It's honestly a very frank look at the drawbacks and limitations of Windows and a very raw look at what Linux does offer, though it does note some of the technical limitations of doing it, and let's not forget Linux is a lot more complicated to operate than Windows, at the very least when setting it up. So it's another great article from HackerNoon. So with those 5 articles under our belt, I hope I've convinced you to take a look at these articles and give them an honest shot, because they are great articles that are really the best of what we have to offer. And that will be all. I've been Nicholas editor at HackerNoon, and I hope to see you again next week, or whenever